Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 655. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about olives and wine and walled cities, and cathars and canals, and luxury hotel barges as we go barging on the Canal de Midi in southern France. Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Let's talk about luxury hotel barges and the Canal de Midi. Hi, this is Chris, and I'm coming to you from the back deck of the Enchanté, which is a luxury hotel barge sitting on the Canal de Midi in Languedoc region in southern France. And if you haven't heard of the Canal de Midi, it is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It was a canal that was considered to be one of the greatest industrial accomplishments of the 1600s. The creator, Pierre-Paul Riquet, built this long canal. It's a canal that connects the Atlantic to the Mediterranean. It's 360 kilometers long, and it has a number of different structures. It has 328 different locks, aqueducts, bridges, tunnels that allowed these barges to move, originally with freight and now with tourists in between those two areas. And the king supported the construction of it because he thought it would cut off trade from Spain, or would take some of the tax revenue away from what they were getting and get it to himself. And it was not as economically successful as they thought. I guess the family that built it, it took them about 100 years until they were able to recoup their investment that they had put into it, which is long after Monsieur Riquet had died. In fact, he died a year before it was completed, sadly. It was also sad because many people thought it wouldn't work. They thought that there wasn't going to be enough water to run the canal, but there's a big reservoir at the high point near Toulouse where they provide all the water that the canal needs, and the canal has been in operation continuously since it opened in the late 1600s. The canal was finished in 1681, and what it's popular for now is canal cruising. And that's either the luxury hotel barges like the one I'm on, or in the summertime it gets filled up with what the people on the Enchanté call the plastic boats. You can rent a boat and go out on the canal, and more about that a little bit later. I wanted to do this particular cruise, one, because I've wanted to do a hotel barge cruise for some time. We've talked about barge cruising on Amateur Traveler before, but what we talked about was the canals in England and Wales and the small boat cruising, the narrow boat cruising there. And this is a very different experience. The size of an average barge in Europe is about 38.5 meters long, or well over 100 feet long. This canal is a little smaller, and so the barge we're on right now is 30 meters long, or just about 100 feet. And it is not the experience that my wife thought of when she heard that I wanted to do a barge cruise. She focused on the word barge, not on the word luxury, and luxury is what this experience is. The owners of this particular hotel barge, and that's Louisa and Roger Gronau, actually bought it when it was a freight barge. And so they bought a 38.5 meter long freight barge, and the first thing they had to do was shovel out the sand and gravel, and the next thing they had to do was they were trying to make it fit on this canal, and so they had to saw it in half and take out an 8-meter section from the middle so that it would fit through the locks. Now, this basically is the largest barge that would fit on this particular canal, largest in length, but also largest in width. In fact, it's so closely patterned to the canal that there used to be a couple square corners on the back crew quarters of the barge that were left over from the original construction. And when they were trying to get it through into the canal for the first time, those two corners hit a stone bridge, and all the bridges here, the original bridges, are stone, and the barge stuck for about 20 minutes until they found a nearby rowing team and got 30 big guys to go get into the barge in the back, and that added enough weight to basically get the barge under the bridge. It's a 2-story barge, and there's really just enough room in this canal for a 2-story barge. Most of the boats are a story and a half, maybe, or 1 story, but they have 80 tons of ballast in the bottom of the boat to make it ride deep enough so that it will fit under the bridge with 2 stories. Even with that, I'm sitting in the front of the boat, and there's an open dining table there, and there's a shade above this dining table that the captain has to be able to lower with hydraulics because it would be too tall to get through many of the bridges that are here. So there's really just enough room for this 2-story barge. I want to describe the barge to you, and I'm going to do it in top to bottom, front to back, so you have some idea, a mental picture. There'll also be pictures, of course, on the website or in the iTunes enhanced version. But the front of the barge and the bow of the boat, there's 2 big spotlights as well as 2 big anchors. And then up on the deck are foldable bikes that fold up there so that they can get out of the way of your viewing, but can be unfolded when you want to get off the boat and go for a bike ride. And there are 8 because that's the maximum number of passengers on this boat. There's only 4 cabins for passengers, so it's a very small from that point of view. Some of the barges get larger than that. Again, some of the canals can hold bigger boats than this. Behind that, a couple crew cabins are tucked underneath there, and then there's a jacuzzi that you can sit in and watch as you cruise. We're cruising in April, so we haven't gotten into jacuzzi yet. Behind that is this open dining table area, teak dining table where I am under the sunshade. Beautiful on the warm days to come out. And of course, we've had a mixture of weather here in April. It's gotten up to about 70 degrees Fahrenheit, so very comfortable temperature, shirt sleeve weather. But when we've gotten up early in the morning, it's been more see your breath kind of weather. I hear the crew here is putting away the gangplank behind me, or the gangway behind me, because we're just getting ready to go. It is early morning. It is almost 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock, the locks open. And this is a French canal, So the locks open up at 9 o'clock. They close again for lunch, for an hour for lunch, and then they open up again, and then we'll close, I think, again at 5:30. And so whether you're cruising on a big boat like this or one of the rental boats, you have to plan your schedules around when the locks are opening. And we're just down from one of the locks here on the Canal de Midi. Behind the area that I'm in is the main cabin where the passengers hang out. There's the Wi-Fi device there, so we can have internet. There's a couch and some chairs there where you can sit in a nice sitting area, and behind that a glass dining room table that will seat 8. And then next to that is the open kitchen, and we can watch what our chef is doing, Sylvain, and ask him questions about what he's making. He will probably be making dinner starting right about now, even though it's 9 o'clock in the morning and we won't eat till 7 o'clock at night. He is cooking pretty much all day. He doesn't do as much for breakfast. The breakfast, it tends to be fresh pastries from some local bakery, and then also fresh fruit and cereal and breads and things like that. But lunch is a 3-course lunch, and dinner is a 4-course dinner. You get to throw in that cheese course, of course, because we're in France. And then behind the main passenger area where the passengers hang out is the crew quarters, and behind that is where the captain will drive the ship from. So he's way at the back of the boat, and he is driving the boat because there's a red flag in the middle of the front of the boat on the bow. And that is a very important flag because that is how he's steering. He's basically trying to put that red flag in the middle of the bridge or in the middle of the locks as he goes in from 30 meters back almost. And the other thing that's important about that flag is the height of it, because the height of it is such that if we clear the flag, we'll clear the boat. So if we were to go through a bridge for some reason and that flag were to hit, he would know to immediately basically back up. There's something wrong. We're riding too high. Probably means we need to fill up with water or something like that. There are some of the bridges that are low enough that we need to make sure we have the tanks full before we go under it, or apparently find a group of a rowing team, but that is not something that happens that often. Certainly not something we would expect to have on this trip. This is the first of the cruises of the season. So the first week in April opens the season. The owner, Roger, has actually been on with us all week. He lives in the area, and so he's been commuting here. It's only the 5 crew cabins, so there's not an extra one for him. But he's been coming on because just to make sure that the captain who's new to this canal is familiar with it, and just to make sure that everything is working correctly for this particular season. And it's also the first time they're going through this canal this season, so they're just trying to make sure that there's nothing new going on that they need to know about. They empty out the canal every winter in sections. Apparently they find bikes and cell phones and sunglasses in all the locks where people have been trying to take pictures or something and have dropped them over. But they've done that, and now we're opening up the canal basically. So we're still in a very low season in terms of traffic. In fact, we pulled into a lock, I think it was yesterday, and it was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and we were the 3rd boat through the lock. And so it's really just not that busy. Okay, they're undoing the ropes now. And so we're getting ready to shove off, again being almost 9 o'clock. And the lock will open at 9 o'clock, and we want to be the first ones through. Well, there's really nobody else here this time in April. If we were in the middle of the summer, there'd be a lot of boats. The hotel barges have priority, and they pay for that privilege. But basically, they have schedules to keep, and it's expensive to pay for that. And so if you do rent a boat, one thing you won't get Sylvain. You won't get your chef unless you provide your own. You'll also not get Claire, who is our tour guide, and so we don't spend all day cruising. They used to. But what they found is that wasn't as good of experience for the passengers. The passengers got a little cabin fever, so they don't cruise as far as they used to. We were doing a relatively small section of the canal. I told you about how long the canal is, 380 some kilometers. We're only going to cruise only about 45 miles from start to finish and that's just a small section of the canal. We're cruising towards Carcassonne, and I'll tell you a little bit more about Carcassonne later. That's where we're going to go this afternoon, as we're in the last full day of the cruise. And that's the other reason that I picked this particular cruise, is I've been wanting to go to Carcassonne for some time. But getting back to the boat, and then if I go downstairs in that big cabin, there's a spiral staircase going down. There's a laptop there if you didn't bring your own and needed to use the internet. There's a small library of books about the Cathars, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, or the region, the Canal de Midi, or other things. Then there are the 4 passenger cabins, and the passenger cabins can be configured with twin beds or put together as a double bed, and they have all ensuite bathrooms with stonework and shower and beautiful, comfortable cabins down there. They have portholes because we're down at the water level. When you look out from your cabin, you're looking out just a little bit above the water level. And again, the boat is really only about 2 feet from the bottom of the canal. So if the boat were to sink, in the very, very unlikely event that were to happen, it wouldn't go very far. Basically, the emergency instructions are grab the champagne, go up on the roof, and we'll sip champagne, because the boat can't go under. It really is just too big to do that. So there are life jackets in our cabins, but they're really for if you take this boat out on a river, you need that. You don't need them in the canal. The other thing that's different about canal cruising is there's really no waves. There's, when a boat goes by, you might feel a little motion, but I honestly haven't felt any motion that isn't driven by our motors, and our motors have just kicked in. And coincidentally, Roger has just arrived just in time for the boat to pull away here. Roger, you're going to miss the boat.
Yeah. Oh, so they know we're coming, do they? You told them?
Yeah, he was just stood on the bridge.
No, I didn't up there.
And we are underway. What we'll do during the day, during the times of cruise, you tend to cruise for about 2-3 hours, and then again we'll park the boat, we'll moor the boat to one of the many different spots where there are. Some of the spots have no facilities, like where we parked last night, and so they have to have their own generator, which they'll shut off at night just to be kind to the neighbors and to the sleeping guests, but they'll run off of batteries during the night and then basically fire up the generators during the day so that they have electrical power. And then some of the spots you can attach to water and to electricity so that you can recharge your batteries and also put your generators at rest and get fresh water. But the gates of the lock are just opening up in front of me, and the gates of this particular lock, and I don't remember, there are single, double, and triple locks, and I don't remember which one this is. I think this one may be a single lock. And so the gates just opened up, and these gates are maybe 15 feet tall. We have to go under a bridge that looks like to be about 14 feet tall in front of it as we pull in there. And then next to every one of the locks, there is still a lock house where the lock keeper lives, and there are still lock keepers. The big difference is they now have remote control devices to control the locks, rather than in this particular part of the canal, they're not spinning the big wheels to open the lock. I guess there are some of those further up into the canal, but not on the section we're going to be on. And every lock keeper's house has markers on the side that say how many meters back to the last lock or forward to the next lock. And the sunshade where I'm sitting is lowering so that we can get under this bridge ahead of us here. And so you cruise from lock to lock. There's not a lot of other obstacles in between except a few low bridges. They used to be that the Canal de Midi, if you see pictures of it, quite often the pictures will show just rows and rows of trees along the side and a very shaded path. Unfortunately, within the last 5 years, a lot of these plane trees, and that's the type of tree, that's not a disparaging remark about the trees, that's just the type of tree they are. I was not familiar with that. A sycamore is in the same family as a plane tree, but they succumb to a fungus, and it's a fungus that they're getting through the roots, and so a lot of the places where we started in Le Sommet On the canal, there were freshly planted trees, but a lot of the older trees unfortunately have died. And they planted them not just to make it a very picturesque canal, but it was also planted in the 1600s basically to shade the canal to prevent water loss. This is the south of France, and so in the summertime, this is going to be very warm. It's one of the reasons why there is this sunshade where I'm sitting, is that in the summertime, you're going to need it now because there aren't quite as many trees as there used to be. There will be again in 20 years or so when some of those trees grow up, or 100 years. But right now, it's a little more sunny than it used to be. And the summertime is also going to be drier. Basically, this area, like the area that I live, doesn't get rain in the summertime, so it's a warm area, warm climate. A lot of grapes around here, a lot of local wines that we've been drinking. I was giving you a tour of the boat too, and then behind our cabins will be the rest of the crew quarters. There's 3 crew quarters in the back and 2 in the front, just based on geometry, smaller crew quarters in case you're thinking of working on a hotel barge. But again, the crew eats the same food we do, so that's a nice perk to think of if you're thinking about a different job. There are 5 crew members on the boat. Might as well tell you about them. I mentioned Sylvain, who is our chef. Our chef is from France. He's from the region of Burgundy and has been basically a chef for 20 years and has been on this boat, I think, for 10 years. And 10 years is about as old as this boat is. And barge cruising is relatively new as a phenomena on the canals of France. France has 3,000 kilometers of canals. Canal cruising popular here and also very popular in Burgundy, but many other canals in here. And this barge, when it was built, it was bought in Holland and it was retrofitted in Belgium and then sailed down over the course of about 4 months. It took to sail through all of the canals coming down here to the Canal de Midi, which is again in the very southern part of France. The canal hits the ocean, used to hit it at Narbonne, and now it hits it more at Sète. We've talked about Sète in a previous episode of Amateur Traveler, where we talked about the Languedoc. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. We are sailing under the bridge right now. You can start to hear the water that's spilling out from the spillway and we're entering in the lock. And again, this does look like a single lock. The locks in the Canal de Midi are interesting shape. They're kind of a bowl shape. So instead of straight walls on my right and my left, they're coming out in bowing out away from the barge. So we'd have extra room in the right and the left, except not on the entrances, so it doesn't really help that much. But it does mean that the only places you're going to ding the paint, if you hit the paint coming in, are going to be the 4 corners of the boat.
Ah bon chien. Bonjour, je suis Theo, a tour leader with Explore, and this is Punti. He's helping us find truffles under the trees next to this beautiful vineyard. Maybe for tomorrow's cooking class? Oui, it's 7h. Parfait. 7:00. Not everyone gets to enjoy a Bordeaux sunset this way, but you will if you explore. No, Punti. Search exploreworldwide.com and don't just travel. Explore.
And so I mentioned I was talking about our chef Sylvain from Burgundy. Again, been doing this for 20 years, and that barge cruising is relatively new in this area and gotten much more popular. I think it grew 30% last year. It is a very fun thing for people to do. If you do get your own boat and do this, one of the problems that we are hearing about is that people who rent their own boat, well, one is you're just spending the whole time cruising, and they've changed it here on these boats so that we only do about half the time cruising and spend the rest of the time exploring the area, and that's a nice mixture. But the other problem is that some people hear how far they should go, and they say, no, we want to do further than that, and then they commit themselves to too far, and it takes time to get into the locks, and there's lots and lots of boats, and they don't have priority, and so it can become quite stressful because they charge you a penalty if you don't go as far as you said you were going to drop it off. And so that is something that could take a little fun out of it. So if you do rent your own boat and do one of the plastic boats, then one thing you'd want to do is make sure that you are conservative in terms of how far you're planning on going, because otherwise you're just going to add stress to your trip. And then the other thing, we looked at the reviews for one of the particular rental sites, and I won't mention that one. But it was not really, it was a mixed bag. There were a lot of people that were saying that it was just filthy and that people were terrible to work with. So definitely check out the reviews if you were going to rent your own boat and try and do this. If you're going to do something on a hotel barge, you want to check out the ratings as well. I can tell you the ratings for the Enchanté are pretty darn good, and this is a great experience. More about the crew. Then we have two hostesses. Our two hostesses are Agata, who is from Poznan in Poland, where coincidentally half of my family, the German half of my family, came from the 1800s. And then also Minora, whose family used to own a vineyard up by Carcassonne. She's of both half French, a French mother, and a Scottish father. So wonderful English, beautiful accent. So our two hostesses are kept busy as the stewards, where they're making up and cleaning the rooms and always polishing something on the ship, or they're just constantly offering us, something to drink during dinner time. The wine glasses never get empty unless you really want them to be. We're raising back up the sunshade here, and they should be getting ready to close the gate behind me. And then you should hear the water start to rush into the lock where I'm sitting. We'll get a rushing sound of the water because we're going up to Carcassonne, and so we're basically, every lock we go into, we need to fill that lock with water and raise the ship up as we go further in. They tie us down when they get in the lock. There we go. The water is now rushing in to the lock. Our fourth crew member is Claire, and Claire is up on the banks here of the lock. She's the one who's tying down the ropes, but she also is the one who drives the van then to the next lock, and when we go out to Carcassonne, she will act as tour guide for us. She got up early this morning and ran out to a local bakery and picked up fresh baked goods, so she's always off running around doing something. And then Captain Morgan is our, yes, and that is, his name is our captain on this particular barge. This is his first year in the Enchanté, but he's been on barges for a number of years. And then Rogers, the owner, is joining us on this particular cruise, but he's not always on here, obviously. They also own another barge, actually. They own the barge called the Finesse. And the Finesse is a longer barge. It's that original length of 38.5 meters, and that barge is in Burgundy. One of the reasons why this barge, this particular area, has the smaller locks is that it is the first big canal project that was done in France, and so it is an old canal. As we said, it was not even clear that it was all going to work. It was quite the first thing, but it was a major thing. It is an older canal, and a lot of the other canals did come later. There are four main wine grapes that are grown in this area: Grenache, Syrah, Mourvedre, and Carignan. And I apologize for my French in general for this particular trip. And most of the reds that are served as a blend. In fact, to be one of the AOP wines, one of the official way that wines are done in the Languedoc region, they actually have to be a blend of at least two of those. But we've had some wonderful local wines. And a lot of the food that we've been eating also has been local, has been from somewhere within, say, 20 miles of where we are, including some fresh seafood from the coast. I would tell you that I was not a seafood fan, but, when Sylvain is making it, I'm a fan of everything so far. So I mentioned that we're heading towards Carcassonne. So Carcassonne is one of, if not the best preserved medieval walled fortress in Europe, certainly in France. And it's a place that I've been wanting to get to for some time, trying to figure out how to add in Carcassonne into some particular trip. We're going through the gates now of the lock and heading into the canal off for our 9-kilometer trip to the next lock up to Trèbes. And Trèbes is where the cruise will actually stop. They'll turn the boat around, which I'm curious to see how they can possibly turn a boat this big around in a canal. Must have a wider area up there. But that's just before we get to Carcassonne. We won't actually cruise all the way to Carcassonne. We'll cruise just a little short, and then we'll hop in the van and run over there this afternoon. But the significance of Carcassonne is that this is an area that was populated by the Cathars back in the 1600s, and the Cathars were deemed to be a heretical branch of Christianity. I think based on my understanding of the theology, that is an accurate description, although, to me that means they need a firm talking to, but to Pope Innocent III, that meant they needed a crusade. And so this is one of the places that was a part of what they call the Albigensian Crusade, because the Cathars are known by several names, and one of them was the Albigensians because they were thought to be very popular in Albi. And they were a dualist, was their theology, which means that they couldn't possibly picture that God had created evil. And so their understanding was that God created good, and that was your soul and all that was eternal, and that the devil created humanity and created your body, and so that the body was evil. And that basically had this somewhat of a sense of reincarnation, too, that if you didn't become a good person, if you didn't become a person who was a Cathar, or whatever they called themselves at the time, that you would come back as a horse or something like that. And because of that, they didn't eat meat, and they believed in abstinence, certainly among the clergy, but also among the laity, because the body was evil. And so there was this crusade that happens over 20 years from 1209 to 1229, where the Pope declares that they are heretical and offers their land to any noble who will participate in this crusade against them. And one of the cities where they were being harbored was this walled city of Carcassonne. And so as we go through various cities here along the way, we've been seeing some of the Cathar history as well as the other history of the region. One of the places we stopped at, for instance, was the city of Minerve. And Minerve is this little tiny town, but it was both a walled town as well as a town on a promontory between two rivers. So it was very defensible. And so this was one of the places that had accepted in some Cathar refugees and basically withstood a siege for several months as this crusading army was coming through, and they set up trebuchets around 4 places around this city, and one of them, the trebuchet called the Bad Neighbor, managed to destroy the well of the city, and then pestilence broke out, and they had basically at some point decided they would surrender these Cathars to the Crusaders. They were then brought to the church and given the chance to either recant or be killed. And they chose to be killed because, after all, the body is just evil. So why not just go ahead and get rid of it? So we keep running into this history as we come through this region. So I mentioned that every day then we're going out and doing different excursions. The same day, for instance, we went to a olive growing cooperative. This was Lolebo, and Lolebo basically processes both table olives as well as olive oil. So we did some olive oil tasting there. I can't say there's as much difference between different olive oils to my palate, as there are between different wines, but it was interesting to try the different olive oils. And then we also learned more about the process of taking olives, for instance, from the tree. You can, if you're picking for table olives, for olives that are going on your table, it's very important how they look, and so you have to pick by hand still today, where if you're picking for olive oil, it doesn't matter as much, and so you shake the tree and get all of the olives to fall off. Typically you wait until the olives are more ripe. A green olive and a black olive come from the same tree, just the blacks are more ripe than the greens. When you pick an olive off the tree, it is still way too bitter, and so the different ways of processing the olives, including the Greek method where you just pack it in salt for about 4 months, and then you rinse it for a week, and then you rinse it for a week, and then you rinse it for a week, and then you've got table olives. Then there are other methods that involve alkaline solutions and things like that. None of the other ones take as long, but all of them take some time to basically get that bitterness out of the olive so that it's ready to eat. These olives being served with the pit, and the best known one from this particular region, the green gold as they call it, is the Luc olive, and so we've had several of those along our trip. We also backtracked on one day and went back to Narbonne, and Narbonne has a interesting cathedral there. The cathedral was built up against the city wall, and then the person who was the archbishop wanted to tear down the wall and extend the cathedral into a normal cathedral size, but there was great protests about tearing down the wall. It was right after that crusade happened, and so they didn't feel safe yet from other foreign armies coming in or whatever, and so they didn't tear down the wall, and so it's almost a demi-cathedral. It's about a third the normal length, but it's the third tallest cathedral in France, and so it's quite tall and yet very short in length, one side to the other. But a pretty cathedral there, as well as we went to the bishop's palace, the archbishop's palace, which always seems like to me to be a little bit of a misnomer that an archbishop would have a palace. Went up in the tower and toured a little bit around the beautiful city of Narbonne. One of the things we were able to see in Narbonne is some of those plane trees, because the plane trees that weren't by the canal didn't succumb as quickly to the fungus, because the fungus was spread by the water in the canal. And so that was interesting to see rows and rows of plane trees by one of the areas just off the canal, which is a paved area where they do community events, but that paving, in fact, may have helped prevent the loss of those trees. We've also seen other small things along the way. So we started, for instance... Oh, that's the bell tolling the hour here. We started, for instance, as I mentioned, in Le Sommeil, and Le Sommeil had a bridge over the river, an old bridge, and there's a plaque dedicated to the American president Thomas Jefferson there. And the reason why is Jefferson was the ambassador to France, and he was the ambassador to France after the opening of this canal, about 100 years later. And so one of the things he wanted to see, as somebody who was an inventor and somebody who was interested in the development of industry in the U.S., was how this canal worked. And so he went down and toured the canal and stayed in Le Sommeil for one night when he was down there. And so there's this plaque to this friend of France, because he was a Francophile for sure. He took some of the information he learned and passed it off to the people who would later build the Erie Canal. And so certainly the people here feel that the Canal de Midi influenced the building of the Erie Canal, which was the first big work of its sort in the U.S. and really where America started to learn engineering. So props to the Canal de Midi for that connection. The other thing, yesterday we were in the small city of Marseillette. And in Marseillette, which is just a little tiny village, there was a tower, and the two other passengers who were on here with us and Joan went off to walk in the city, and they ran across this tower, and it turns out to be a semaphore tower. Just before the invention of the telegraph, during the French Revolution, they built this series of telegraphs that used poles and rods and things to send visual signals at a distance. So you could, for instance, send information if there was an invading army coming from some particular area. And everything was done in codes, and every telegraph operator had a code book, and all very interesting, but basically very quickly surpassed by the electric telegraph there in the early 1800s. So interesting things along the way. We cruise past these little towns and these fields and these chateaus occasionally. I'll have this where I'm sitting here paying attention to my recorder, or I'm looking at my laptop, and I suddenly realize that the sunshade has gone down because we're about to go through a low bridge, and I just had one of those experiences. So I mentioned Minerve that we went to, which is where the Cathars were besieged, and said that that was a beautiful village there in an outcropping in the middle of the river. That particular village is officially one of the plus beaux villages de France, and that is the very beautiful villages of France. There's about 100 different villages that have that designation, and they have to have two different things about them that are either significant. They have to have either significant beauty or significant history, or some combination of that. And for Minerve, for instance, it's that combination of, it's quite a stunning setting, and then it also has this significant village from the time of that crusade against the Cathars. The other village they went to that was also plus beau village de France was the village of La Grasse, and La Grasse is another beautiful village in a valley on a river bed in a floodplain. There's a Benedictine monastery there that was founded in the 8th century. Basically, this was founded with the blessing of Charlemagne, and it became a very important abbey in the area. The abbot there was in charge of 100 different churches and abbeys throughout southern France at one time, and so there was a lot of riches that came into that particular abbey. So it's quite a magnificent abbey. It's divided into two parts. There is still a part that is a Benedictine abbey with about 30 different monks there, but there's then the other part became a public building. In fact, at one time during World War II, or just after World War II rather, it was housed orphans, but now it's being turned into a museum, and there's some beautiful artwork and restoration work that is going on there in La Grasse. And then La Grasse is also known for a lot of its artisans, and there's a program there that marks the different shops, and there's a sign outside that says basically my artwork is created here in my workshop. So you're not buying something that is from the indigenous people of China, but instead you can go in and watch people making their crafts and buy things there as well. And we had lunch in that particular village because it happened to be the opportunity for the chef to go shopping. The chef goes shopping on Wednesdays, and so we went out to lunch instead. Yesterday, our outing was to a local wine producer to do some wine tasting, and so we got a chance to do that while we were here. And then today, our last outing will be to Carcassonne, and so I'll continue this after that particular outing. And it is after that outing, as promised, although it is a few weeks after that outing. I did a week in Slovenia after this trip wrapped up, which we'll be talking about next week, and then have been back and doing some work because I started a full-time job and also did a press trip to Las Vegas. But let's finish this story. Carcassonne did not disappoint. I think that's really the bottom line here. It is a beautiful walled city. It was restored in the 1800s, although it's amazing from the pictures how much of it still was standing, how much of the walls were still there. And it's also amazing to me how many of the walls you could still see, not just the medieval walls, but you could see the portion of it that was built by the Romans. This was originally a Roman city and a Roman fortress, and some of that is still preserved. It has undergone many changes through the years, and when they went to do the renovation in the 1800s, they chose the time period of just after that crusade against the Cathars. That was going to be the time period that they wanted to capture in terms of the renovation. Because after that time period, there was some significant rebuilding of the city and redesign of the city. And so they have to kind of choose one time period because there are so many things. The city is such a vibrant, constantly changing place that when they do this renovation, they kind of have to decide renovate to when. It is a very touristy city. It gets a fair number of tourists, so you can certainly dress up in medieval armor and get your picture taken and all that sorts of things. You can buy your Carcassonne plastic sword and all those. But it is a beautiful city. You can get out and walk the walls of the city. You can also tour the main keep of the castle and see that. It's up on a hill. And what happened was that the people who were in the city at the time of the Cathar revolt were expelled from the city, those who were not Cathars, those who were faithful Catholics, because they had harbored these other people, and they were told to go build a city down the hill away from the defenses of the fortress. And because of that, the new city built up down the hill, and that preserved the old city here at the top of the hill. Definitely something worth seeing. It was wonderful seeing it in April on a beautiful day because there were not that many tourists there. It certainly gets a lot busier in the heat of the summer, my understanding is. I'll put a link in the show notes to my pictures of France, which will include the Canal de Midi and also this city of Carcassonne, if you want to check those out. But I would strongly recommend both playing the board game Carcassonne and going to see the city. No specific recommendations. I would spend the extra money to go into the keep, the inner fortress of the city. It's worth the time, and then I would take some time to shop, to eat, or even stay. There's some lovely hotels right in the old city. And that was our trip on the Canal de Midi. Amazing trip. The trip was sponsored by European Waterways, and all of the bookings for the Enchanté as well as the Finesse, the sister ship up in Burgundy, are done through European Waterways, and European Waterways handles the bookings for quite a few different canal barges, luxury canal barges. And so if this is the kind of trip you're interested in, there's certainly a great resource to go there. This is a luxury trip, and so this is not inexpensive. But that's really an intentional choice. They found that you could pack a lot more people on a barge, and there are some that used to do that, as I may have mentioned earlier, but they really found that giving people a much more custom, a much more personal experience is really what a lot of people are looking for. Wonderful, relaxing trip. Again, you can do the Canal de Midi independently, although that's going to be quite a different experience. One of the questions I usually ask our guests is one thing that made me laugh and say only in the Canal de Midi, and that for me was trying to turn around a 100-foot barge in a canal that is not 100 feet wide. And it was quite a thing to watch because they basically went to where there was a small stream that went into the canal and managed to put the nose of the barge into that, just making enough room to turn around. Thought for sure we would get stuck, but I guess they do it every time. But it is a narrow canal, and so trying to turn around a big barge boat is not an easy thing. And if I had to summarize the Canal de Midi, I would say relaxing, delicious, and medieval, because you still get a lot of those medieval cities along the way, including that city of Carcassonne. In news of the community, I heard recently from Kathy, who said, "Hi, we just listened to the 2017 podcast on Tokyo and wondered if there are notes available anywhere. None of the place names were recognizable, but we're going there on Tuesday and would love to see these sites identified in writing." And we've talked about this before, but I need to bring it up periodically. Yes, for every show we do, there are show notes, which usually will then name the places. We will have gone to the trouble of looking them up and putting a link to some website about them, maybe the Wikipedia site or something else, or an article about those particular sites. So that's a great place. You can always find those at amateurtraveler.com, or if you look in the lyrics of the episode you're listening to, there are links in those lyrics. The same information that goes in the show notes goes in the lyrics, as well as a link to the show notes. So you can always do that if you're looking for where to find them. With that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com like Kathy did, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one more cathedral.